This is Dr. Jeff Brubacher, an emergency room physician at Vancouver General Hospital and a road safety researcher. He's the Director of Emergency Medicine Research at Vancouver Coastal, and his research focuses on road user safety with a special interest on impaired driving and traffic policy evaluation, including speeds. And he sits on a number of road safety committees. And then Sergeant Rob Quilley is a 29-year veteran of the RCMP. He started his career in rural Saskatchewan. For the past 21 years, he's worked in the Lower Mainland Traffic Services. He serves on a number of committees in road safety, is an instructor, and is also a police motorcyclist as well. Dr. Emily Newhouse is a medical health officer at Vancouver Coastal Health, where she works on public health issues ranging from communicable disease to disease control and injury prevention. She trained as a public health physician at UBC and has a long-standing interest in speeds and speeding. She too is active on a number of road safety committees and the BC Health Officers Council. And lastly, Vince Stancato was appointed Chief Deputy Coroner in BC in August of 2013. He was previously a coroner and regional coroner and has worked his way in the service since 2003. Previous to this, he worked in a variety of capacities in the Ministry of Attorney General and Solicitor General, involving crime prevention and other projects. He has a postgraduate degree in criminology. And I also want to just thank you, Bella, for setting such a great context for this panel in your comments about speed. You obviously know more about the history in terms of speeding in Canada than perhaps many of us do. It's very impressive. And also appreciate your point about the 85th percentile. We saw in your National Traffic Safety Board report the fact that modern research has kind of refuted the 85th percentile. And just a few comments I wanted to make before our first speaker, just to set the tone for our panel. And you might be wondering what the difference is between speed and speeding, hence the name of our panel, Speed and Speeding. And that's something that I think often gets portrayed in the media incorrectly. Essentially, there are two problems, and one is speed, because the speed isn't always set right. In local communities, for example, where cars mix with pedestrians and cyclists, speed limits can be too high. And out on highways, it can be set too high as well. So that's speed. And then there's speeding, which is, as Bella talked about, that is exceeding the speed limit or driving too fast for conditions. So they're two separate things, and we're actually going to cover them both in our panel. The other thing I think that's really important as a backdrop to speed is just to repeat what perhaps a lot of people know already, and that is the physics of speed. Mathematically, we know it's a nonlinear quadratic relationship, and again, it works on two fronts, and that is, small differences in speed mean large differences in stopping distance. So the odds of a crash are nonlinear in its relationship. So small drop in speed, much larger difference in the chance of even crashing. But that's only the first part. The second part is if a crash does occur, the amount of kinetic energy, which is just moving energy, is a function of the mass of the object, the vehicle, multiplied by velocity squared. So again, small difference in speed, really large difference in the amount of energy that harms people. And of course, the backdrop to speed and speeding, it bears being repeated, I think, and that is that the foundation, we know that the leading thinking in the world on road safety is the safe system approach, which is really quite simply strong measures for vehicles, vehicle safety, strong measures for drivers, strong measures for roads, strong measures for the right speed on the right kind of road. And it's not a competition. It's not about, well, the bigger problem is distraction or alcohol. The idea is that if we're working on speed, we're expected to work on speed and the role of speed. And those people that are working on the problem of distraction are working on that problem. And those people that are working on vehicle safety are working to improve the safety of vehicles. And that together, when we all strengthen our efforts, we actually can achieve significant reductions in deaths and serious injuries, which is really the ethical problem, deaths and serious injuries. And lastly, before we start, I think it also bears repeating that speed is like a magical safety buffer. So we know that from so many studies that humans make mistakes, endless types of mistakes. The Australians in a recent book in 2014 showed that 60% of fatals, crashes, and 90% of injury crashes aren't the result of egregious, extreme behaviors, but ordinary human behavior, ordinary errors. So there'll always be ice on the road, a blinding sun, a driver who makes a mistake, and reduced speeds will always perform their physics, acting as that buffer. So with that, I just want to ask Jeff to come up.
Okay. Well, thanks. So I'm going to tell a story. I don't have a story of a compelling crash, but now that I think of it next time I give this talk, I will. But I'm going to talk about the impact of speed limit changes in British Columbia. And this started a couple of years ago, back in November 2013. The Ministry of Transportation announced a rural highway safety and speed review. And they had a couple of good things in there. They talked about winter tires, wildlife protection, variable speed limits. But the main focus of the review, when I read it, was to gauge public support for increasing speed limits in the province. And they talked about how speed limits were set. They talked about the 85th percentile. This was, they talked about a trade-off between travel time and risk of crash. It was not from a safe systems approach. They got a lot of feedback, and the public in most parts of the province were largely in support of increasing the speed. And this was a report that came out sort of summarizing that consultation. What didn't come through in that summary were the letters from stakeholders, the submissions from stakeholders from many disciplines speaking against increasing the speed limit. The public health officers from all of the BC health authorities spoke against increasing the speed limits. Road Safety BC, another government organization, spoke against increasing the speed limits. The police, the BC Truckers Association, road safety researchers at the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser, the Injury Research and Prevention Unit, the Justice Institute. There were many stakeholders who spoke out against increasing the speed limits. Dr. Perry Kendall, who is the provincial health officer at the time, wrote an editorial talking about and actually setting out the evidence about the systematic reviews showing that increased speed limits results in more crashes and more injuries. Now, countering that was this group, Sense BC, Speed Education, Not Speed Enforcement. And they were a group that successfully had us remove speed cameras. They called them greed cameras. And they're slick, they're media savvy. They did a really good job of sort of undermining the campaign to not increase the speed limits. They said Dr. Perry Kendall and the BC Medical Association should stick to what they know. They talked about emotion-laden arguments, meaning talking about injuries and fatalities and not about 85th percentiles. Ultimately, as we know, the transportation minister at the time did increase the speed limits on 33 segments of highways, an average increase of 10 kilometers. So this is a picture of the Coquihalla Highway, where the speed limit is now 120 kilometers an hour, 75 miles an hour. It goes over a mountain pass. They now have introduced variable speed limit signs in certain segments of it. Nevertheless, there's a lag with those signs. It's not 100% effective by any stretch, but 120 kilometers through this terrain. So what happened? Let's fast forward. I like using ambulance dispatch data, and the advantage of that is it's available almost in real time because it's collected for administrative purposes. So we can, within a couple of days, know how many ambulances were dispatched. So starting about 8 months after the speed limits were increased, we started looking at what happened to ambulance dispatches. And there's 2 lines here. The one that says IRP, that's immediate roadside prohibitions. Jeremy spoke about that yesterday. So that was the extra tools that police had to, at the roadside, give penalties or sanctions to drinking drivers. And we did see still the decrease there. We've evaluated that extensively, and it has a huge decrease in alcohol-impaired driving. But we also saw, since the speed limits were increased, a sort of provincial level increase in ambulance dispatches. Now, is it conceivable that you increase the speed limits on 9% of the provincial highways and you have an increase across the whole province? I mean, there was a lot of rhetoric around faster is safer and the slow-moving vehicles are the problem, so maybe it is. It's also possible, this model didn't include gasoline sales, it's also possible that there was just some other global increase. Nevertheless, this is what we found, and we started reporting this. So in February of 2016, and Neil, you're back up in another 30 seconds. In February of 2016, Dr. Tarek Sayed did an evaluation sponsored by the Ministry of Transportation to look at the outcome of these speed limit increases. And although the report was finished in February, it wasn't immediately released for reasons that I think we'll see. And it actually wasn't until June of 2016. This was actually after a Freedom of Information request from one of the health officers in the province, Dr. Carsley, who's since semi-retired, I think. He's still around. When it was released along with a, let's call it evaluation, post-implementation update by Modi, and it was sort of buried at the end of that as an appendix. The Ministry of Transportation review said, you know, crashes went up on some segments, they went down on others, it wasn't consistent. They talked about 10 years decreasing trends in fatalities, so things were still better now than what they were 10 years ago. They talked about all the different causes of crashes, distraction and impaired and bad weather. And they talked about global increases around the world in traffic fatalities. They sort of glossed over the fact that Dr. Sayed's review was a controlled review that considered all of these factors by including other road segments where the speed limits were not increased. So I'm going to let Neil come up and just quickly talk about Tarek's review, and then I'll come back.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so Tarek Sayed, again, couldn't be here today, so he asked me to just step in, and Jeff was kind enough to slide these 5 slides of Tarek's in here. So I just wanted to let you know, first of all, that Professor Sayed is a distinguished professor at the University of BC. He's a fellow of the Engineering Institute of Canada and the Canadian Academy of Engineering and the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering. He's also the director of the Bureau of Intelligent Transportation System. In 2014, he received the Centennial Road Safety Award from the Transportation Association of Canada. He supervised over 80 master and PhD students, and he's basically known all over Canada and around the world as one of the most esteemed engineering scholars. So Jeff has kind of reiterated this point again. In 2013, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure increased speed limits on 1,300 kilometers of rural highway to bring BC to the point of having the highest speed limits in Canada. These were implemented in the second half of 2014. Rural divided highways have a maximum posted speed limit of 120. And other rural undivided highways, for example, that are not separated, don't have a median barrier, also experienced speed increases. UBC was engaged to conduct a review based on 1 year of data. So Tarek did a before and after using a full Bayes analysis, which accounted for all kinds of confounding variables. He worked with a number of data sets provided to him, including crash data, volume data, and location data. He had 2.5 years of pre-data as well that he worked with, and then 1 year of post-data. 60 treatment sites and 95 comparison sites. What he found was overall, the results showed that the sections of roadway where the new speed limits were imposed experienced an increase in the number of severe, fatal, and injury crashes at 11.1%. This was found to be statistically significant at the 95% confidence level. He also pointed out in his study, buried at the end of the release, that this increase is consistent with hundreds of studies already conducted around the world around speed and crash risk. We already know that when speeds go up, accidents, injuries, and deaths go up. When speeds go down, accidents, injuries, and deaths go down. As a result of the 2016 release, the ministry was forced to revert the speed limits on 2 sections of highway because the results were extremely bad. The ministry at that time promised a follow-up study, citing the need for more years of data. It is now the summer of 2018 approaching, and we have 3 years of data. We have all of 2015, 2016, and 2017, with a 6-month lag in allowing the data to settle. We actually have 3 full years of study. With larger numbers, the results will be more robust, and that study is needed. So he makes the point that this is time for a follow-up study. It has to be done using the same full Bayes methodology. It has to be conducted independently, has to be transparent. He also told me that the study can be carried out in about 30 days, and that these results should be made transparent to the people of British Columbia. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just to carry in, so after this report came out, for Terig's report and the ministry's report, it obviously got caught up in the news. This is from the Globe and Mail. Crash rates increase in half of BC's highway zones, and then they cite Terig's report as well with that 11% increase. Following that, there were editorials. Several of us, I see Kate Heskey's in the audience. She was one of the people who wrote this opinion piece in the Vancouver Sun. Speed limit increases prove deadly, should be reversed, along with myself and Tarig Sayed and Gordon Lovegrove. So we had 2 traffic engineers and 2 public health researchers. And in that op-ed, we said the minister should report to the public that the increased speed limits did not improve safety, but instead made the roads more dangerous, so speed limits must be increased. The minister was allowed his own opinion piece, and he said safety is paramount to our ministry, remains our #1 priority in all our decisions. The speed limits were, as Neil commented on, rolled back in 2 of the segments, but still remain in the other 31. So we also did an evaluation of the speed limit changes using a different approach than Tarig, just different methods. It's just a different evaluation. This was funded by the Canadian Institute for Health Research. And basically our objectives were to evaluate the impact of the speed limit increases on auto insurance claims, police reported crashes, and ambulance dispatches. So we had several other data sets that Dr. Sayed didn't have available to him. And we asked, were the speed limits associated with a change in road trauma at a provincial level? Just again, the idea with all this talk about faster is safer, did that have an effect at the provincial level? What happened on the affected road segments where the speed limits were increased, and what happened nearby on the road segments within 5 kilometers to where the speed limits were increased? So this is just a little diagram to show you an example. This is Highway 97 going through the little village of 100 Mile House. The orange section there, the speed limit was increased from 100 to 110, and then it slowed down to 70, and then down to 50 going through the village of 100 Mile House. So the affected segments would be that orange segment of highway, those 37 kilometers where the speed limit was increased. The nearby roads would be the roads on the same highway where the speed limit wasn't increased, and then the little side roads and the place where it goes through the village there. So those would be nearby roads. So we took all of these events using GIS coordinates. We mapped them to the affected segments or nearby segments. We arrived at monthly counts, adjusted for the number of days per month, also adjusted for missing data, because not 100% of these had GIS coordinates. We adjusted for population growth, and this time we managed to get gasoline sales, so just as an indicator of increased travel, so we adjusted for gasoline sales as well. And we used a statistical method, interrupted time series, using ARIMA modeling, which I won't go into because I'll get confused. And this is what we found. So the bold numbers are statistically significant increases. The first number is the magnitude or the point estimate, and then the numbers in brackets are the confidence intervals. So if you look at the affected segments, you'll see statistically significant increases in several areas. All auto insurance claims, injury claims. I'm going to go over these in a few of these in a bit more detail, and also fatal crashes. On the nearby segments, there were a couple of increases. Across the province as a whole, by and large, the changes were small, and only one of those was statistically significant. That was the casualty claims or injury insurance claims. Oh, I should say TAS, that's a short form we shouldn't use, traffic accident system, so those are police-reported crashes. Okay, people with sharp eyes will notice the minus 47% in fatal crashes on nearby segments. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes just to put that in perspective. Not statistically significant, but there was that one area where there was a decrease. So this is what it looks like. I mean, I don't think you don't really have to have many statistics to look at that graph and say that it sure looks like there was an increase on the affected segments in insurance claims. Just to go over this, the solid black lines are the actual number of events. The dotted red lines are it's just for illustrative purposes. It's sort of the moving average within those different, between the vertical lines. It's not how we came up with the actual percentage. That came from the statistical model. But at any rate, a 43% increase on insurance claims on the affected segments. On the nearby segments, a 26% increase. So, people talk about you increase speed limits and people go faster on the highway. When they come off on those surrounding roads, they continue to go faster. And other researchers have noticed this as well. So that's spillover effect. And maybe this represents a spillover effect. The most concerning, though, is this. This is the fatal crashes. And according to our model, more than doubling of fatal crashes on the affected segments. This would amount to 15 fatal crashes per year across the province. We have about 260 fatal crashes per year on average. So this is almost 6% of the fatal crashes in the province. Now, I commented on the fatal crashes in nearby segments. Our model is showing a decrease, not statistically significant. I just wanted to point out that the number of crashes on the affected segments is more, to start with, than the number of crashes on the nearby segments. So the net effect of the high increase on the affected segments where the speed limits were increased and the lower decrease on the nearby segments, the net effect is an increase in fatal crashes. We also looked at travel speed, and the ministry did their own speed surveys where they measured travel speed at various times before and after the speed limit increases. We looked at that using these permanent count stations. So these stations just record all the vehicles that go by, and they put them in what's called a speed bin. So the number of vehicles traveling 60 to 70 kilometers an hour and so forth. We took the midpoint for each speed bin and called that the travel speed, and we use that to calculate the changes in these various parameters before and after. And what I wanted to point out was just this monthly average standard deviation. Remember that the promise was that increasing the speed limits would decrease the variation in travel and make the roads safer. And there you see there was overall a 4% increase in the standard deviation. So the variance in speed did not decrease. So the conclusion is, following the 2014 speed limit increases, there wasn't the reduction in speed variance that was anticipated. There was no improvement in safety, which was the promise for increasing the speed limits. To the contrary, there were marked increases in fatal crashes, an excess of 15 fatal crashes per year, and an increase in auto insurance claims. There was some evidence of a spillover effect on nearby roads. And the sad thing is these findings are consistent with previous evaluations. The real message is this shouldn't have happened. It was predicted. And there's a large body of research that shows that increasing speed limits results in more crashes. Here in BC, I hope that we're going to heed this evidence and roll back those changes. And for people from other provinces, I hope that you don't follow our example. That's the end of what I have to say.